Morning. Now normally the news that the son of a 7-time Formula 1 world champion has signed a multi-year deal to make his debut in Formula 1 next year and attempt to continue that incredible Schumacher legacy, normally that would be the biggest news in our sport. But not today, because today we hear that George Russell will drive the W11 for Mercedes in Bahrain this weekend. Woo-hoo-hoo! What a crazy week it's been in the world of Formula 1, all starting at the Bahrain Grand Prix when Romain Grosjean emerged like a phoenix from the flames in that incredible crash, almost unscathed. He's been released from hospital today, by the way, which is great news. And then to go on from there, we went on to have Lance Stroll upside down. We had an amazing race, and then on Monday morning we start speculating about who might replace Romain Grosjean. And the Haas team announced an amazing announcement that the son, or the grandson rather, of two-time world champion Emerson Fittipaldi will race for the team this weekend. He'll make his debut in Formula 1, Pietro Fittipaldi. That's big news. But it was massively overshadowed by the news that Lewis Hamilton had tested positive for COVID-19. I mean, that shook the world of Formula 1. This pandemic had now reached the very top of our sport. So then all the talk was about who might replace Lewis Hamilton this weekend. Loads of speculation about, would it be George Russell perhaps? Would it be Stoffel van Dorn, the reserve driver? Would it be Hulkenberg? Would it be somebody else? And amongst all of that speculation, Haas announced yet another driver announcement. Nikita Mazepin will race for the team next year on a multi-year deal, again making his debut. That's two big announcements for two kids that had been hugely overshadowed by the Lewis Hamilton news. But then, today, this morning, Haas had another driver announcement to make, and this was perhaps the big one that we all kind of knew about, but we all wanted to hear. The son of a 7-time world champion, Michael Schumacher, will make his debut, again on a multi-year deal, starting next year to race for the Haas team. Massive, massive news. And yet that also was swept hugely under the carpet by the news that George Russell will race the W11 for Mercedes in Bahrain this weekend. Massive news. I mean, that has properly taken over the news pages. Incredible. Can't wait to see it. And on top of all of that, Jack Aitken, who will make his debut this weekend in Bahrain for Williams, filling in for George Russell, of course, also is not getting many column inches when it comes to press talking about his announcement. Now, perhaps for some of these people, that's not a bad thing. I'm sure Jack Aitken and I'm sure Pietro Fittipaldi will probably benefit from the having less pressure around their big debuts this weekend. But what a mad week it's been! And it's only Wednesday! People swimming in that lake. I mean, it must be -5 degrees ambient today. And there's people swimming in the lake. No wetsuit, just a swimming costume. That's hardcore. Just been chatting to a couple of those wild swimmers. 4 ladies, probably in their 50s. Amazing, some of them wearing wetsuits, but some not. Amazing, they've decided in every day in December, instead of eating chocolates from an advent calendar, their advent calendar is going to be that every single day they take a dip or a swim in that freezing cold lake. Amazing, massive respect. What an awesome idea, I love it. We'll leave the talk of the 2021 Haas driver lineup for another day, but there are some debuts, as I mentioned, to talk about for this weekend. Let's talk about those quickly because the guys making their debuts, Pietro Fittipaldi, perhaps not a bad time to make a debut, is it, if you're going to make a surprise start to your Formula 1 career. He's stepping in for an injured driver. The pressure's kind of off. He's coming into a racetrack that no one's ever been to before. He's in a car that's pretty uncompetitive, and so the expectation is relatively low. On top of all of that, it's been, as I said before, massively overshadowed by many of the other announcements that have been made. And in a similar way, Jack Aitken comes in with the same amount of pressure taken off a little bit from the outside. Of course, both of these guys will absolutely feel the pressure themselves, but I guess from Jack Aitken's perspective, he's also coming into a car that we know is the slowest car on the Formula One grid. But for him, he's got a teammate who's massively struggling in that Williams. Latifi is not a top class driver, which gives Jack Aitken the opportunity, a little bit like George Russell has, to shine, perhaps more than some of the others. Right, let's head home and talk about the big one. George Russell to Mercedes. So, George Russell then in the W11. What a prospect that is. How excited are you? Because I know that I cannot wait to see what happens. I know I said yesterday that there's a potential for this to, I guess, go one of two ways for George. It could be the most amazing opportunity. I mean, let's face it, it is the most amazing opportunity. But how the weekend goes could have a major impact on both how he's viewed by Mercedes, importantly, but also, I guess, by the wider world, the media, the fans, the people around George. He's got to deliver in one way or another. That doesn't mean he has to go and win the race. It doesn't mean he has to go and out-qualify his teammate or any of those things. He just has to impress the people on the inside of Mercedes' team most of all, because those are the people that are going to be central to the decision of whether he gets the job on a permanent basis from 2022 and beyond. It's cold outside, far better off in here. Blimey, don't know how those people were swimming in a lake earlier. Goodness me, I've got to go for a run in a minute and I'm terrified about that. They were almost naked in some water that must have been almost freezing. Anyway, George Russell, he has opportunities this weekend. Opportunities to, yes, impress the Mercedes team, to, yes, impress the world, but he's also got huge opportunity to learn, and that's what he should be taking most away from this weekend. Learning more about his craft, learning more about what it takes to be a Formula One driver, adapting to different machinery, skills that he'll be able to take away and take back to Williams that will hopefully benefit him in the rest of his Formula One career, wherever that ends up being. But there's also a risk to all of this. As I touched on in yesterday's video, George Russell's stock value at the moment is way up here because at the moment he's dominating the Williams team. He's become a team leader in only his second year. He's never been out-qualified by a teammate and he's absolutely blitzing both of his teammates this year and last year in race results as well. He's doing everything he needs to do to put himself in the prime position to be elevated up the grid in the future of Formula One. But on the other side of all of that, he's now coming into what is the best car, unquestionably the best car in Formula One. A car that around this particular circuit, this new outer ring in Bahrain, should be utterly dominant. The most similar looking circuit to this was probably Monza. Really high speed circuit, low downforce, and in that situation, Mercedes were very, very dominant. I would expect something similar around here. So he's coming into a car that should be able to dominate the weekend. He's coming in against a teammate in Valtteri Bottas who, in most people's eyes, is just not quite good enough because at the moment he's only ever been up against Lewis Hamilton in that Mercedes car. So a lot of people will look at this and say, okay, here you go, George, here's the keys to the W11. If you can go and either pop it on pole or second, that'd be great, please. If you can bring it home on the podium on Sunday, probably just behind Valtteri, because Mercedes want Valtteri to make sure that he claims that second place in the championship. So he's the team leader, unquestionably, this weekend. And George, if he can bring it home just behind him, that would be perfect. But is that an unrealistic expectation, given that he's just been parachuted in at the last minute without all of the normal preparations that a driver would have approaching a debut for a new team? And that maybe is a concern of mine. I don't think it'll be a concern of George's. He will look at this as a massive opportunity, and rightly so, and I'm sure he'll grab it with both hands. But let's say they have a dominant car and Valtteri blitzes pole position, blitzes the race to win without the one guy that's been standing in his way for all this success that he might have had. Lewis Hamilton won't be there this weekend. So could Valtteri take a clean sweep? If he does that, the expectation, at least in some quarters, will be that George Russell will be able to follow him up just behind. But what if he's outside of the top 5? What if he's outside of the top 10? And that's not an unreasonable thing to expect, given that he's had very little experience, recent experience with Mercedes. He had no experience with this particular car, working with these particular set of engineers. And this is not just about learning the switches on the steering wheel, a big enough challenge in itself. This is about learning how the team operates, but it's also about learning to drive a car with a massive amount more downforce than the Williams that he's used to has. That has a very different effect on how the car behaves, how it looks after its tyres, how you have to drive it to look after its tyres in a race situation. So a massive challenge for George, but one that he will absolutely relish. And I have no doubt, looking at the character of George, together with the skill set that he has in a racing car, he's more than capable of taking this challenge on and getting the very best that he can, given the situation, out of it this weekend. Either way, it's a mouth-watering prospect. If you are one of those people who said, well, Formula One's not worth watching now because both championships have been sewn up with races still to spare, well, I hope you didn't cancel your subscriptions or make too many plans for this weekend, because how can you not watch? There's so much to look forward to. New drivers in new cars, and the guy, the Brit, for us Brits, who we know is a future star of our sport, getting a chance to sit at the very top table in the prime seat in Formula One. Mouth-watering. I cannot wait. And look, some of you may well be saying, well, look, this is all very well, but poor old Stoffel van Dorn. What's the point in a team having a reserve driver if they're never going to use him in that situation? And there's some validity to that argument. But on the flip side of that, this was a rare opportunity for Mercedes to pop George into a car during a live race weekend situation, both to assess him and to give him the opportunity to see what he can do, to work with him under those circumstances. That's not something, an opportunity that comes up very often for team or driver. So I think both parties can take huge positives away from all of this. I mean, there are a couple of ways this could go, as I said earlier on. I hope it's massively positive for George, but as I said, I cannot wait to see which way it goes, and I will be glued, as I'm sure most of you will, to your TV set. I'd love to know what you think about all of these things that have happened, the announcements that have come. Are you looking forward to this weekend more than any other over the 2020 season? Let me know. I cannot wait. I'm sure you can't too. Have a great couple of days, guys. I'll see you soon. Ta-da. So, George Russell then in the W11. What a prospect that is.